the X-Carve will be a different class, but it's more of an online-based, web-based software platform, which is really, it's cool. You can get to it on any machine, and as long as that thing is sitting on the network or on the internet, we can print to it. I don't want you doing that because I'd really rather you be here when it's cutting, pieces of wood. But that being said, that'll be a different class. One thing that I was going to do, I started to work on this and then I got distracted, but there's a couple of, let's see, all right, so there's a couple of websites. It's actually the only one website, but there's two pieces of software that we're going to be talking about today. They break it up into two different pieces. One of them is called Carbide Create. Carbide Create is where we're actually going to be designing the projects. There's lots of other softwares that work with these machines. This is the most simple. This is the one that comes with the machine and is the simplest to use. It's more drag and drop, like I said. But you can get super advanced with some of this stuff, including three-dimensional carving, which is really cool. If you've seen anybody do that, this machine will do it. Whereas basically you can take a solid piece of wood and three-dimensionally carve out stuff. Rather than just cutting shapes, it's carving in different depths. So it's pretty cool how that works, but a little more advanced. I'll leave this up here. You guys can take a picture of it, or you can just write it down. But Carbide 3D is the manufacturer that makes this machine and the creator of the software. Carbide3D.com is the website I'm going to send you guys to download the software. It's all free. Both of these pieces of software are free. I recommend you download it to your laptop. You can design the stuff at home, bring it up here, and then you can cut it while you're here. The reason I want to walk through this is because there's a couple of settings that you just need to know if you're going to download it to your own software. Now, the machines that we have here, the computers are already set up with the right settings for this machine. But Carbide makes several of these different machines, the different size machines, so we want to make sure that it matches what we have here. Or else you'll end up with, if it doesn't, I always say these are just dumb machines. They're not super smart machines, and they're going to do exactly what you tell them to. So if you tell it to go 3 inches this way and 6 inches this way, cut, it's going to do that, no matter if there's something there or not, whether it's itself, if it's your hand, it doesn't know any different, right? So it's just going to go where you tell it to. That being said, we've got 32 inches by 32 inches to work with. So if you go in and you tell it cut at 48 inches, it's going to try to run itself into the sidewall because it doesn't know any better, right? It's going to hit that stop and it's going to beep, just kind of like this laser does over here. So you're not going to get anywhere. So that being said, just kind of want to walk through that. The other piece of software, that's the creation software, the Carbide Create. The other is called Motion. There's no really reason for you to download Motion on your laptop unless you were plugging in your laptop to that machine, because Motion is what controls where you're loading the file into Motion. That's what controls the machine and tells it where to go and what to do. So you've got the creation software and then the operating software. The operating software is whatever computer is attached to the machine is what you're using that for, where that's going to tell. And I'll show you that. But let me see if I can find what do I do with my keyboard and mouse? Can you hand me, can you reach around? Or, I can do it from here. All right, let me see if I can. Nobody's using this. I'll use this. Maybe I won't. All right, so. You want to sit here? No. I'm going to go to this website. This is Carbide 3D. This is the website here. The machine that we're using, let me go to the main website. Okay, we have a Shapeoko 4, so you might want to write that down, just be aware of that. These are all the different sizes. We have the Shapeoko 4. There's information on here, resources, you can download the manual. This is where you can download the software, which is where I put the links in the presentation there. There's also a ton of video training things that kind of go over the same stuff we're going over today. That's a good resource. So really great website, really great support, tons of YouTube videos. If you just type in Carbide 3D or Shapeoko 4, there's going to be training videos on YouTube that are great. The one other thing I wanted to show you while we're here is in Carbide 3D's website, there is something they just launched called Cut Rocket. And Cut Rocket is kind of like, if you guys are into 3D printing, it's kind of like Thingiverse, on where everybody can load project files. Up here, you just sign up for it, but I think it's free for the most part. And if you're doing signs, storage boxes, toys and games, organization pieces, they've got the cut file that you can download and load right to the machine. As long as you know the size of the piece that we're doing, that you're cutting, and you just make the adjustments there to make it match. But that's pretty handy. Once you get comfortable with using the machine, this is a great resource for some pretty cool pieces, including like this is that like an example of the 3D, kind of the 3D carving that it can do, which is again a little more advanced. All right, so any questions so far on the website and on the products we're using? I know we're just getting started, but I just want to kind of show you that. If not, I'll move on here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and just launch the software. I'll walk you through the software. So, a couple of things in the initial kind of startup. Everybody see past me if I sit here?
Yep.
Yeah. No, we're good. Like I said, I didn't really plan this out much. Everybody see okay? Yeah. All right. So on the software here, File and New basically brings you to this screen. So it's kind of broken up into a couple of different areas here. What we see here, this workspace that's here, if you'll notice the grid up here, this is set to inches right now. You can change this to millimeters if you want. I'll show you how to do that here in the settings page. But basically this is showing you that this piece that they have in here now is 15 inches wide by, what is it? Is it 5 3/4? So there's a little gear that's over here where you can set this up. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to set up our piece. First we got to know what we're cutting and what size piece of wood, for instance, we're going to cut on, right? So this is where we would go in and we'd set up that piece. What I'll do is once we get into this, I'll take this piece of wood here and we'll measure it out and then we'll put the settings in here. So that's kind of what that first little gear is here, is setting up the job. Basically saying, I'm using this kind of wood, it's this shape, it's this size, and this thickness, which is really important. The way that, we'll get back to that here in a second. In settings again, down here it's supposed to work. So you can set the machine. This is another thing. If you download this software and you're going to work on our machine, a Shapeoko 4, you have to tell the software that you're going to be working on a Shapeoko 4, right? So this is, again, this job setup is where you're going to tell it what machine. So down here it says machine Shapeoko 4. There's a whole drop-down list of the different ones that they have. So you'll select 4 just to make sure you're on that. The type of wood, like I said, you'll set up the type of wood. We've got softwood in here, aluminum, things like that. We'll just keep it at softwood for now. Are we?
Yeah, are we allowed to do aluminum on either one of these?
So,
Or like brass or something?
you can try. I would do lots of research. The router that we have that's in there now, I wouldn't say it's not the beefiest router, so you may end up having issues with chatter and things like that because it's just not a very sturdy. It's really more for wood. I have seen people do it. You've got to have the right bits. You could really nerd out on the bits, on router bits, because they have down cutting bits, up cutting bits, compression bits, all this crazy stuff. And once you kind of get into it, you just kind of nerd out on it, you'll realize like for aluminum, it's a different kind of bit that you want to use that's most efficient. What will happen is that if you're not using the right bit, or if that router can't hang, then what it does is it'll end up, you'll notice that it's not cutting well, or it's getting hot, or the guys that have been doing it for a long time, the metal work and done can attest to this, is that it's like the piece of material that's coming off as it's cutting tells you a lot. It tells
Yeah,
you,
it's coloration.
right, the coloration, how thick it is, how big it is, if it's little pieces, you know. The chatter, which is when maybe that router is not handling it well, it kind of jumps around, doesn't give you a really smooth cut. All those things go into play. We haven't had a lot of luck with that setup, doing aluminum. We haven't tried brass, but wood and acrylic, like butter, no issues there.
Let's say, have they tried, like, either, I'm assuming probably not liquid cooling, but air cooling with the aluminum, or have
Yeah.
they tried it?
We tried it with we tried it with both liquid and air cooling. We had a little rig set up with the air compressor that was constantly pushing air down onto it. It's just, it comes down to the bit, and they make a spindle for that thing that's really more of a beefy spindle that we can upgrade to eventually. That I see all the guys that are doing, they're using that spindle. It's just a heavier duty. It's water cooled and the whole thing. But right now I would say I do want to set up. We got a little small CNC that we could do a little class on, but I want to set that up for small pieces of aluminum.
Yeah, the one over in
The one that's in the metal working station. Yeah. Nobody uses it, and it's sitting there and just collecting dust. And I've seen people on YouTube take them and adapt them over to doing like aluminum and brass and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that'd be ideal.
Kind of.
I'm trying to get the dust shoe finished for that one.
Yeah. Alien something or other.
It's kind of interesting. So the software is actually on a file and desktop on the CNC computer.
Yeah.
You actually have to write your file inside that software, pick the G code to a flash to
USB stick.
an SD card,
Oh, SD
and
card.
actually put it in and play.
Yeah. So it's a little bit.
It's like an old school, like sort of like an.
You're absolutely welcome to.
Like
Yeah. Like an
Like actual old.
Yeah.
So you can copy the file that's on there, take it home and design it all up and write your G code and bring it up to the print.
Yeah, and you're welcome to play with it and look up, there's YouTube videos out there for it, and if there are parts and pieces that we need to buy to upgrade it, just let me know and we'll figure out how to fund that.
Supposedly it's a good printer and it works at hard, CNC and it works.
Yeah, so we have some options for metal, hopefully soon. Like I said, acrylic, we've got a couple of acrylic bits that are in there, and wood all day long. Wood grain. Both of these machines do this. Thanks for all right, cool. So I guess the best way to do this is to talk a little bit about the parts and pieces of the machine. Let's see. Well, let me kind of talk a little bit about how it works, right? So he mentioned G code. All of these devices in here really work off G code, whether it's an old piece of milling machine or it's these 3D printers, the laser machine. G code. G code's really simple. It basically works off of XY coordinates, right? And you set a zero, what we're calling zero, like a home position. And from that home position, you tell it how many inches to go this way and how many inches to go this way, right? And it's going to do exactly that. Like I said, no matter if your finger's in the way, no matter if there's not even a half a machine that's left over there, or if it, so it's going to go left, right in the positions that you're telling it to. I can kind of demonstrate this with this screen here. Oh, I forget this is a touch screen. So for instance, if you look over here, you've got a zero. This lower left corner here is zero here. And this edge is, so this is 0 and 0 are these 2 points, right? So all we're doing with the G code is we're creating a graphics file that looks, so we can visually see what it looks like and where we want everything to be, circles and squares and all that stuff. Once you hit go, this thing spits out line after line of code telling the machine what to do with that information. So for instance, if we've got so if we've got a circle right there, then and that circle is positioned at this point, the G code is going to spit out and say, okay, from 0, I'm this many inches over and I'm this many inches up, right? Does that make sense? So all of your positioning is done through that G code. You don't have to worry about that because it's all done behind the scenes. You have to be able to just put the circle where you want it, right? So that is X and Y, right? Z position is the third dimension that we deal with when we're dealing with CNC machines. and 3D printing, right? And lasers, I guess, to a point. But the Z position is the thickness, the up and down, right? So if you've got X, Y, right, you have to have up and down too. So if I've got a piece of material that's 1 inch thick and I want to cut a hole in that piece of material a 1/2 inch down, I don't want to go all the way through it, right? What I'll end up doing is I'll tell that my 0 position for the Z position, 0 is at the bottom of my board. So I want that to stop halfway down to the bottom, if that makes sense. You can also tell it, hey, let's make 0 at the top of the, you have to basically tell the machine where its zeros are so that it knows now I'm gonna go 1/2 inch down from that 0, wherever you tell me the 0 is. Or 2 inches over, or 2 inches X, 2 inches, So that's basically the way the G code works. Again, like I said, they're really dumb machines. We're telling it what to do. It's just doing exactly what we tell it to, which is sometimes a bad idea because the information that you put in, if it's wrong, you're going to do something, you're going to destroy something, hurt something, you're going to mess up your project, whatever it may be. When we get out there and you look at the bed that this thing cuts into, you'll see a lot of heart shapes and really pretty designs in the bed. It's because of that. The machine didn't go, are you sure you want me to do this? I'll drill down into the table if I have to. Are you sure it's not going to ask you that. It's just going to do what you tell it to. So that's something to be aware of. So back to the software. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of get started. I'm going to take this piece of wood that we'll be working on, and we'll just design some shapes in it, cut up a few holes in it, something like that. So I'm going to go back up to the setup page, and I'm going to do exactly what we talked about. I'm going to tell it what our job's going to look like. So you've got width, which is the X coordinate, and you've got height, which to me sounds like that would be the thickness, right? But it's not. It's the up and down. It's the forward and back, right? So how wide is our product, and how high is it, right? So I'm going to say we'll set the project up like this, and make a little sign or something, and that's 7 inches, exactly, right? So it's 7 inches wide by 8 1/4 inches tall. So let's say 7. Here's the width, which I can see 8.25. And see how it should now change the shape. Now that's what we're dealing with. Now this is represented on the screen now. So now when we go to put text on here, we go to put a shape on here, we know how to center it on this board. That make sense? One thing that it does not know still, and this is a huge mistake all the time that I do, is I didn't tell it how thick the piece of material is. So the stock, this is your stock, the stock thickness is super important because if it is set at, what's it set at right now?
0.460.
0.460. So if it's set at 1/2 inch and it's a 1/4 inch piece, where do you think it's going to go? It's going to go right into the bed, right? So that's what's really, really important to know. So the best way to measure this is to grab, and this usually, one of these is usually out there in the drawer out there. So I'm going to measure this and see how thick this is. 6 to 0 it's 0.832 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, my stock is 0.832 inches. Now here's the thing. See this little red dot? Z is the height, the thickness of the material, and we're saying, okay, Z is this 0.832. The red dot is our 0 reference. So right now, I'm telling it, I want the 0 to be at the bed, at the bottom. Now, a lot of times what people will do is they'll set it at the top, which is fine. I think by default, if you download this software, it's going to be at the top. So, that being said, if it's at the top, now you're telling it the top is 0. I'm going to start the cut at 0.832, right? So it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to start way up here and do nothing because it's going to be above the piece, right? 0.832, or it's going to try to start lower than it is. And if it does that, now the bit's hitting the wood and it's not cutting anything, or it's just destroying your piece, right? So it's important that you know where to start at. So, and I'll tell you that because when we go out here to calibrate the machine, we want to tell it, we're going to set the zeros on the machine. We're going to say, this is 0 for your Y, this is 0 for your X, and this is 0 for your Z. That way it always knows, right? So, yeah.
One thing for me is like all mine I do from the top.
Do you?
I tell mine where I want it and all my numbers are how far.
How far you want to do down?
And I always take my thickness and I take a little off it, so I know it's not gonna go through it, and I just take a little off on the sander.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about it.
I would say that top is probably the right way to do it. Here's the reason that I did bottom when I set this machine up. Is because every time you do top, your thickness of your material changes, right? So,
What do you mean by that? By
well-
inconsistencies in the thickness of the material?
well, really just because you may be working on a 1/4 inch piece, you may be working on a 1/2 inch piece,
Oh,
and
okay.
so, right, so it's always moving. I feel like when I was doing the top, we always had to go back and recalibrate. I always had to go back and say, this is the top, this is the top.
Yeah, I always set the 0.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just good practice to set it before.
So I ended up setting the bed as 0, just so nobody would have to mess with it. They could go in and just, but what I realized was that the software defaults and they go to top and it uses 0. So we can do it both ways. I'll show you both ways. Does everybody kind of get that, what we're talking about with the 0 point and dialing in the thickness and saying, okay, here's how thick my material is? Is that all pretty clear for now? And then once you get in there, we set up the machine. It'll all kind of make sense. And just kind of fits. All right, and then right below that is toolpath 0, the center. This is another that's important one. So when we talk about the starting at 0 and measuring however far over to the right, however far, to the left and up and down, it's doing that from where you tell it 0 is, right? So this gives us the option to set, okay, I want 0 to be the lower left corner, the lower right corner, dead center of your piece, right? Right now you're like, what does it matter? Well, when you start dealing with things like circles, then it matters, right? Like if you've got a piece of wood that is already shaped in a circle, there is no lower left that you can accurately measure to, right? So I would set it up as center, and I would figure out where my center is on my circle, and I would point that at 0. And now, if the center is 0, now you're measuring out from center, and it's saying 2 inches this way, 3 inches this way, 4 inches this way. All that'll make sense here in a minute. But the way I've got the machine set up here at the makerspace is I've got some blocking that's already screwed into the bed that is so that you can slide a square or rectangle piece into that, and it's already set to 0 as the lower left-hand corner. So I'm going to make sure that my project is referencing the lower left-hand corner. There is, yeah, no, there it is right there. So lower left-hand corner. So that is, I'm setting up the job. I told it how big the job is, how big the piece of material is, how high it is, how wide it is. I told it how thick it is, which is important. And now I'm telling it where I want 0 to start. I want it to start in the lower left-hand corner. So everything we measure from is lower left-hand corner, as the way it's set up now. Again, it's all up to you how you set it up. As long as you have the knowledge to know, hey, I need to set it up correctly, then you can do it however you want. Like Thomas was saying, like the way he uses it. He's got to have the knowledge for it. Otherwise, if I was to say center, if it was to set like this, and I'm thinking, let me go back to center here. So right now, if I've got it set up like this, and it's referencing 0 to center, when I tell it to go, I'm thinking it's referenced to the, corner, but I accidentally put it to the center. Now all of a sudden, when I say I want to go over 8 inches to the right, it's starting at the center, which is where this little red dot is. It's going to go 8 inches. It could go off the board. Like, it might go off my piece, right? Because I've got it set wrong. That's kind of what we were dealing with you guys, with the 3D laser. So anyway, that's kind of how that works. So I'm going to set this to lower left.
So like you were saying, a circle, if you're going to do a circle,
Yeah.
then you still go down to
And I don't want to confuse you with that. So what I'm saying is that I use lower left if it's because I'm always referencing to a rectangle. Now, if I'm cutting out a circle, doesn't matter because it's cutting it out of a rectangle. Now, if my stock is already round, then I don't have a lower left corner to measure to, right? Because it would, so it gets, that's when you would want to use center for something like that. Make sense to everybody? There's another guy?
Will this thing do a framing, sort of like the laser, so you can see where the travel path is going to go?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, when you hit go, you just cross your fingers.
Pray.
You just have your hand over that stop button.
Yeah.
That's pretty common
So,
practice.
under the pull down,
Mhm.
it says material and softwood,
Mhm.
and then Shapeoko 4, then it says retract height.
Oh, good. Thank you. Talk about retract height. Okay, so what she's talking about. So we've got the softwood, Shapeoko 4, and then retract. Retract height. So the way that the CNC works is it's going to spit out those coordinates, and it's going to say, go over this way 5 inches, go up 6 inches, and then go down 2 inches or whatever, or a half inch. So it's going to do that, and when it goes down and it makes its cut, when it's moving on to the next cut, it has to get up and out of the way, bring the bit up and out of the way, and move over, and then back down. So that is its non-cutting movement, right? That's when it's not cutting anything. It's actually moving from one location to the next. If you've got an odd-shaped piece, or you've got maybe a tool or a hold-down piece or something in the way, you want to make sure that when that bit comes up, because it's always spinning, you want to make sure when that bit comes up from the cut, it comes up far enough out of the way, it retracts far enough out of the way that it can move over without hitting anything else, damaging anything. If I set that to 1/8 of an inch, right, it's only going to come up out of the piece 1/8 of an inch and slide over. Well, it could potentially run over maybe a little plastic hold down or a screw or a bolt or something else that's on that bed. If you're dealing with 3-dimensional pieces that are thicker at one end or higher, then you could run your product.
So that's 1/2 inch above the Z thickness.
Right, above the thickness.
Zero.
Yeah,
How thick
so.
are the,
So is
I
that
don't know.
how,
Is it a 1/2 inch over the zero or a 1/2 inch over the top of the
The
wood?
top of the material. So
Okay.
the way that it knows is, it knows that zero, right now, it knows that zero is at the bed, at the bottom, right, of material. It knows that the material is 0.8 something, 0.832 inches high. So now it says, okay, that's the top of my wood,
Okay,
right? Now it's gonna go up 1/2 inch above that.
okay,
Does that make sense?
1.320 inches.
yep.
Yeah, there you go. Now, you're like, why wouldn't I always set it to 5 inches or whatever, all the way out of the way, like get it all the way up out of the way so it doesn't ever hit anything, right?
Speed.
Speed. You'll realize, like 3D printing, the most frustrating thing is it takes forever to do anything. So you're always looking at ways to be efficient with your time. If I know that I've got a nice little flat piece of 1/8 inch material or half inch material, then there's no reason for me to go up 4 inches over, right? I can just come up barely over the top and scoot across. If I know that my hold downs and my tools and all that stuff are out of the way, that's a reason that I like to use we'll get into that, but I like to use double sticky tape to hold my pieces down. But the traditional way is to use brackets to hold down the material to the bed. And if you use brackets, the brackets could be, what do you think, maybe 1/2 inch thick, maybe?
I think so.
Something like that. So now,
Nice thing with brackets versus the tape is that you don't have to try to calculate what they're gonna do.
yeah. So anyway, I'll show you that when we get out there, but that's a great question though. That's retract height. Does that make sense?
Another question where it was talking about hardwood, softwood, is that, what species are considered hardwood and softwood
Yeah.
based on how they're seeding?
Yeah.
Is it density?
It has to do with
Like
density.
hardness?
Yep,
Okay.
and the reason that it does that is because it's
Heat
going
rates.
to recommend a bit.
Yeah.
It's going to say, and speeds and all that stuff. So it's going to recommend how fast the bit should turn, how much you should cut at a time, all that stuff. So it's going to recommend that. It's going to recommend that based off of hardwood versus softwood. If you get a piece of balsa wood in there, compared to like,
Great question though.
But this you got right here, you think it's soft?
No, I don't.
Oh,
No, you're right. This is like, this is probably like, is that
It's
oak?
oak, it's oak.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
oak.
oak.
Okay. That's not
It's
something.
oak.
You're right.
Okay.
Honestly, I just can't see anything, so I can't tell where hardwood is. Is that hardwood?
That's it.
All right. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna hit OK. And now we've set up our piece. We just have to make sure when we put it in the machine that it's set positioned the way that we've got it shown here, where it's taller than it is wide, right? Because obviously it's square. I'll show you that when we get up there. Okay, creating artwork. If you guys have done any laser work, if you've done any even, Cricut stuff or 3D printing, you can pull in an SVG file. It's really going to be based off of lines, right? It's to follow a line. The line that it follows in CNC terms is called a cut path. It's the router bit path that it takes. Keep in mind that a router bit, everywhere it goes, it's removing material, right? So opposite of the printer, right? The printer is adding material. It's an added printing technique. This is removing material as it goes, so it's cutting away. And that's important to know because another thing that you'll realize, and it took me a while to kind of figure this out for some reason, was bits are round, right? So you'll never have a perfect corner edge, right? They're also flat at the bottom. Most of these milling bits are flat at the bottom. So that means if it's cutting down into a piece of wood and it's running across and clearing out wood, the corners, the edges are going to be sharp because it's a squared off bit at the bottom, but it's round on the sides. So your corners on the outside are going to be rounded. That being said, they make other bits. They make round over bits or round, what are they, technically, what are the mills called with a rounded, is it just round?
Ball
Ball
nose.
nose,
Yeah.
ball nose. So they have ball nose bits which are rounded at the bottom. So if you're doing a pocket, you want it to be nice and smooth and not squared off, then you'll want to change out the bit. So what you're going to do is you're going to first put some shapes in to tell it where to cut and what to cut. And then we're going to tell it how deep do we want to cut that shape. And then we're going to tell it what it's going to know what path to take, but it's also going to recommend a bit. So for instance, if we want that squared off bottom to be sharp and nice and clean, then we'll use a regular end mill bit that's squared off clean at the bottom. If we want it to be a nice contoured shape, then at some point we're going to have to change the bit out to a rounded bit. And what you'll realize is that because it's a rounded bit, if you're calling what's called pocketing, if you're pocketing and you're removing a lot of material, like for instance, we're going to make this into, maybe we'll make this into whatever you guys want, like a pocket change holder, right? So we're just going to pocket it out. When it's removing material and you've got a rounded bit, a ball nose bit, every pass that it makes is going to have a little ridge to it because it's rounded, right? It's not flat. So at that point, you're like, okay, well, what do I do? Well, you switch the bit out for a flat bottom bit, right? Just another bit. And then that gives you a nice, smooth, removable material. But you get to the corners and you want the corners to be round, now you got to be like, okay, I got to switch the bit out. So there's a lot of those kind of things you got to think about when you're milling that stuff.
And then you have to think about the order, which
Right.
one you do first.
Yeah, exactly.
Take out the middle or take out the end.
Yeah, because you're removing material. You can't go back. You can't add anything back. So it's really important that you know what order it's going to go in. So I'll show you that. All right, we've got our size, type of material, all that good stuff in. Let's do a fun little shape. Let's see. There it is. I guess I can show you this real quick. In this, there's a library. Let's see if we can navigate to it. Loading, there it is. These are kind of just built in. This is part of Shapeoko's little software. We can do, let's see, well, you get the idea, basically, of shapes, right? Let's just see some of this.
I think you gotta scoot it over and hit the OK.
Yeah.
Slide the window over, the entire window. Oh, no.
Or just drag and drop.
There we go.
There we go. So double click on it, sorry. I've never used this. Ultimate motion is what it's called.
That'll cut the walls.
Okay, so you see, obviously it's way bigger than our piece, right? There's all these little tools across the side, and this is something that you guys want to play with and kind of get used to these tools. But one of them here is scale. It's that one.
Yep.
So I'm gonna click on scale, and I can fit. I like this because if you guys have done any kind of CAD work, anything like that, that is to scale, you can literally put the size that you want. So if I know that this thing is, what did I say, 7 inches wide, and I want that apple to be 4 inches wide, then I can just type in 4 inches, right? I can say, okay, let's go to 4 inches, and I want to keep the proportions so the checkbox is there. Let's say it's 4. Put it there, right?
Could you go back, please? Show me where you found scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
I look down and.
Yep, so this, so I click on it, and once you click on the actual, your image, all these little tools pop up, and they're under the transform section here. You can move stuff around with a little moving thing. Here's the scale. If I hover over it, it'll say scale. If I click on that, it gives me that option. Does that make sense?
Okay.
There's other things too, that all these little tools that you'll find that are pretty cool, like mirroring. See how it flips it? This is a lot like the Cricut software. It's what it is. Mirror it up and down. I'm gonna highlight this. I'm gonna say, okay, I want this, and then I want to center it. See this piece here? I want to center it onto my workpiece. So if I click on that, it's going to give me all these options. I want to line to the left, line to the right, down, center. Here's the center. Nope, that's not what I do. See guys, this is new learning as we go.
Align to stock.
Align to stock. Yep, align to stock. And then when I do that, with this, it's going to center it. Oh yeah. That's my whole. I'm going to delete that. I'm just going to highlight it and delete it. Okay. So now we have some options. We can either cut this shape out completely. So if we want to cut it out, let me zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're
Usually cut it out all the way through.
Yeah, so if we wanted to cut it off all the way through, right? We're basically want to tell it, we want to tell it on the cut depth, we want to tell it to cut it all the way out, right? We want to cut the entire depth of our thickness. So whatever our thickness is, we go to 0. Basically, we're going all the way to the bed. Just cut it all the way through.
Just put that anywhere.
Yeah, just put that anywhere. If you want to engrave it, let's call it engraving. If you want to engrave it, then it's going to ask you, well, how deep do you want to cut it? How deep do you want to engrave it, right? So if I want to do just the line, and I want to follow this line, and I just want to cut this into the wood, but I don't want to cut all the way through it. Then it's going to say, how deep do you want to go, right? So I have to tell it how deep. If I want to, let me show you the option. Let me get over this. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select what they call a path. This is my path, which is the line, so we're working with, right? I'm gonna go over here to tool paths. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I want to show you these options. So they give you options. What I'm talking about when I say cut all the way through, or if I want to pocket, those type of things, you have these options. If I was to say that I want to pocket this out, what do you guys think that means?
Take the insides out.
Take everything out of the inside, right? And leave it. So, like for instance, if I'm making, like we talked about, making a change holder or something like that, I'm going to take the material. I only want to remove the center part. So what it'll say is if I hit pocket, select by layer using current selection. So if I say I want to pocket, it's going to draw all these lines, these are tool path lines that we talked about before. This is the path that the bit is actually going to take to remove the material, based off of the default bit that's in there, which is an 1/8 inch flat bit. Does that make sense? So 1/8 inch, those are 1/8 inch lines. It's going to remove all that material. I'll show you what that looks like because I can do a.
Where did it get the tool? Is that something it knows what's in there?
So you can tell it's going to default to something, and depending on what you want to do, you'll have to change it. Now, what I was going to show you is that this is going to take 20 minutes to cut all that material out with an 1/8 inch bit, based on the depth that we had in there. If I change that, you notice the thickness of the lines there. If I change the tool to a 1/4 inch, right, technically it should cut that time in half because of the thickness of the cut, right? So I'm going to go select a tool.
Does that make a rougher cut?
Nope, it'll be the same type of cut.
Okay.
But it does affect the size of the detail that you.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to show you guys. So because now all of a sudden, well, you guys kind of get it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but let me show you this. So if we're engraving all this stuff out, removing all this material, we get up to this corner back here. It's not, if I've got a 1/4 inch or a 3/4 inch bit that's in there, it's not going to make that nice little point because the bit's going to be so thick and round, right, that it won't be able to get in there to do it. So that's where an 1/8 inch bit is nice because you can do more detailed work. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's all these little things that you don't really,
Now,
So
Kate,
with the
we gotta
1/8
think
with
through
the
it.
1/8 inch bit, it doesn't look like it's gonna cut the stem at all.
You're right. Yep. See this right here? It doesn't know what to do with that material because it's like, look, this is thinner than an 1/8 inch. So if I do that, it's just going to cut the right. So it's not going to know what to do with it. So at that point, maybe you want to go to a 1/16 inch.
can you do like a 1/4 inch to do the rough cut and switch it to a
Yeah.
narrow one easily, or is that a
You
big
can. So
problem?
you have to select. In order to do that, what he's asking is there a way to do the big part with the big bit, right? And then you get into the detailed stuff. So what you would do is you would actually break this up into two paths. And you would say path 1 is using a 1/4 inch bit, and I would only make the big shape path 1, and then I would highlight the small stuff and make that path 2, and I would set path 2 as a 16 inch bit. That's going to speed up the process because it'll knock this out pretty quick. Whereas if you try to do this with a 16, it's going to take you 40 minutes or so. So anyway, yeah, what'll happen is that because you're telling the G code that we talked about, you're saying, okay, path 1 is the big stuff, path 2 is the small stuff. It's going to stop the cut in the middle of it, and it's going to, when it's done with this, and it's going to say, okay, you got to change a bit to the 1/8 inch. It'll tell you that. It'll run it to you, the bit to you, and it'll stop the machine and say, okay, change the bit out. And then when you hit go, it's going to go back and finish the top part. Does that make sense?
How do you do it for, if you wanted to flip that, would be the reverse with the, let's say you wanted to do the outline of the after.
Oh, right.
Leave the after.
And leave it.
With negative.
Gotcha.
Well, before you go there, so the max depth is 0.1. So if we,
Yes.
and our material is 0.8. So if you wanted to do half the depth, you'd do 0.4.
Great question. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So what basically he's talking about here is the cutting depth. So because we highlighted this and we said we're going to pocket it out, it's going to say how deep do you want to pocket it out, right? Right now we've got it set to 0.10 of an inch. So it's just going to barely pocket it out, right? We can change that to, like you said, a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, right? We can go all the way through it. If we set this at the east stock bottom, like if I do that, it's going to put it at 0.83, which means it's going to cut out all the material, right?
It's going to be a window.
If you wanted to, we're talking about 3D engraving or 3D kind of carving
Yeah.
shapes and stuff. So if we wanted to make a bowl shape out of it, something instead of like that, you wanted to have it do this on
Yeah.
the inside all around.
Mhm.
Is that something that?
So what you would do is that there's a couple ways you do it. If you wanted the bottom to be flat, but the edges to be curved,
in the ball mill?
you would change out the bit. So you would do 2 cut paths. So you would go in here and basically what I would do is I would duplicate, if I was doing this apple, which is kind of a bad example. If I was doing the apple, I would duplicate the apple, make it smaller, and then create 2 cut paths. I would make 1 cut path, and I would say I want a ball nose. That would be the outer cut path. I'd say I want that to be a ball nose bit, and then it would go through and it would cut that contour.
Yeah.
And then I would say I want the second cut path, which would be the smaller apple, the inside piece. I would say I want to cut that with a flat, regular end mill. And then what it would do is it would tell you to change the bit out when it got done with that outer piece, the carved piece, and then it would just cut away all the rest of the material with it much quicker and smoother because it's a flat bit. Apple's kind of a bad example for that, but I can kind of demonstrate that. I'm gonna hit cancel. All right, so the other thing is, I'm gonna see if I can do this one. Use the touch screen.
Like show where it would be like a little cutting board kind of, you cut around it and leave the middle. Cut around the lines.
Yeah.
All the way through.
And leave the middle.
And it'd be like a little.
A negative, right? Yeah, it would be almost like the negative, yep. So I can show you that too. So, all right, so that, look, I just demonstrated pocketing, which is when we're removing material from the middle. Contour is another term that they use. Contour is when you are following the line with the bit. So that is when, you know what, I can do even better. Let's do this. I'm gonna do pocket again. I want to show you this. So that is with, what is that, the 1/8 inch bit?
Yep.
And then, okay, I created this tool path, the first tool path, and that's what that looks like. I'm gonna go down here and I'm gonna say, let's take a look at what that's gonna look like. Cherry wood. So, the green lines that you see are the path of the tool, just like before. That's the path it's gonna take. So I'm gonna remove those so that because those are distracting in this station. Alright. It's a little bit easier to see like that. So that gives you an idea of what that's gonna look like. As pocketed, right? So that's a pocket cut. That makes sense? Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete this, and then I'm gonna go back to show you the next one.
Second one.
Second, thanks. All right, contour. So I'm gonna highlight this again, or shape again. Now I'm gonna hit contour. Contour is cutting along the path. So it's gonna follow the line. That's gonna make the bit follow the line. Now notice how now I've got 2 lines. I've got this blue line. This can be confusing. But notice how the orange dotted line is our actual apple. That's our design. The blue line is the cut path. Notice how it's on the inside of the orange line. Because here, see how it says offset direction? Is inside left. So, this is another thing to kind of wrap your head around. If, for instance, you want to do a circle, let's just say it's a circle, or maybe the apple, and you want the apple to be exactly 4 inches wide, and you want the outside line, which is the orange, to be 4 inches across, right? You want it to be 4 inches right here, right? Then you're removing material on the inside of that line. So you want to offset that bit, because again, if the bit was right on the line, if it followed the orange path, and the bit is, let's say the bit is a 1/4 inch thick bit, if it followed that line, it's going to be off 1/8 of an inch one way and 1/8 of an inch the other way, right? Because it's going to follow that line. So now it's asking you, it's going to say, okay, do I want to be inside the line or outside the line? What material do I want to leave, right? And that's why it's giving you the option to set up offset. Does that make sense, or is that confusing?
Yeah.
If I say no offset, it's going to put the blue line, the cut line, right on the orange line, which is your actual artwork. Which means the thickness of the bit now means you got to take that in consideration now. Now it's actually going to be, if I use a circle, it's easy to explain. If I want to have a 4 inch circle and I cut it on the actual line, then I'm gonna be, it's actually gonna
Four
be
and a-
4 inches
and a quarter, yeah.
4 1/4 wide.
Because
Does that
it
make
always
sense?
deals with the center of the bit.
It deals with the center of the bit is your point, right?
But
So
it-
what it's gonna do is it's gonna create an offset for half the thickness of the bit, in order for it to.
Can you go back and show that view that you did before with the
Yep,
cherry?
absolutely, yep.
Because when you did the inside, the stem would not have cut.
Right, you're absolutely right. So if I go to, so now, let's see if you guys can kind of see that. Now, since I did it with no offset, I did it right on the line. If I wanted this apple to be 4 inches wide, it's not gonna be. It's actually gonna be 4 inches and a quarter because of the thickness of the bit.
Well, if you go to the leaf, you'll see how it changes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you see how smudgy that is? Whereas before, it just kind of, it followed that inside of it.
Well, it would not have cut the stem at
It
all.
wouldn't have got the same.
Yeah.
It would have just ignored that. Does that make sense?
So that one you would almost have to do with a smaller bit to get the thing to look correct.
Yeah, you would have to. Yeah. But you still have to take that into consideration because even the smaller bit, even if it's 16, then yeah, it's just going to be a 30-second off. Right?
When you set the offset to the outside, so that the cutting point.
Yes, exactly. So, yep, you're exactly right. So the other option would be, okay, maybe I want if I'm wanting to, let's think about a pocket that we did, let's think about the opposite of that. We want everything else to be a pocket, but we want the circle or the apple to be raised, right? But we want the apple to be 4 inches wide. We would cut on the outside of that. Does that make sense? I know you guys are like, crap, I just wanted to cut some.
No, this is good.
I just want to cut Texas. It's very overwhelming, but it's good. It's good to know. Once you guys start playing with it, you'll really start to have a blast with it.
Hey, that's right there where you were about to put little dots down,
Yeah.
marker here to here to here on the line. Is that how you section it out so that you were talking earlier about do this part and then that part?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of edit tools in here where you can actually go in and
Like go
back
from
in
here to here
Yeah.
with this bit and then here to there with that bit.
Yeah, it's probably good that I'll walk you through this. So this software's kind of broken down. You notice these tabs that I'm bouncing back and forth. You've got a design tab and a toolpath tab. Design is think of all the creative, cool stuff that you're doing, in your brain, and you're making it all look pretty. And then the toolpath is actually how to get it done, like the hard work, right? Which is exactly the way that I'm built. Like how people say you got your left brain or your right brain. I'm right down the middle, right? So I jump back and forth between these two. And you kind of have to think that way. You're like, okay, I can design it one way, but then I got to make it work with round bits and thick wood and all that stuff. So you'll see jumping back and forth between these. But in the design tab where you're actually being creative, I can take this and I can start to break through some of these tools. I can break this up into sections. if I wanted to. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah, you have to pass the knowledge because I'm here so often and I can just ask you. That's what over here sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, creating rectangles, I just basically create a rectangle, I'm moving it around with I only clicked it once, and then I click it again, and when I do it, locks it in place. I always do this, you kind of want to tend to drag and drop, it doesn't really work that way. You just click the shape you want, click into the workspace, it's going to put it in a weird place. What I do is I put it there, and then I change the size of it. So if I want that rectangle to be, what do we say, 4 inches wide, and let's say we want it, 6 inches tall. Now I can grab it and I can move it around.
It didn't change the first one. It still says 2.
I thought that was an option.
Still not.
Still didn't change it.
There you go.
There he goes.
Alright. So, rectangle, same idea. If I click on this and go back to my toolpath, now I'm going to say, well, I want to pocket that out. Do I want to just cut it all the way through? If I want to cut it all the way through, I say contour. It's going to say, is this what you want to do? This selection here, I say yes. I can say bottom of the material. Now again, if I want to leave this like a picture frame and I want this to just be a big rectangle hole in a piece of wood, I'm going to cut all the way through. So I'm going to say bottom of the material, cut all the way through it, that thickness. Inside left, because I want the leftover piece of hole, the leftover hole to be the 4 inches wide. Right? And then hit OK. And now when we go to look at this, and you see what it's done, it's cut all the way through. That makes sense?
Can you talk about tabs, because you really don't want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Alright, cool. We'll get through the cut here. Okay, so what he's talking about is, once we get to kind of talking about hold downs and things like that, if I lay this piece of wood down on the board and I cut that out, if I'm holding this piece of board down onto the bed with some hold downs, like some pieces of brackets that are holding it, keeping it down, there's nothing holding the center down. So this center piece right here becomes loose. Yep, it gets real sloppy because now you're cutting everything out that's holding it in place. Well, what happens is when this bit gets all the way down here and around here and it gets up to here and over here, now there's only a little tiny piece that's holding it together. Now that center piece starts to move and it'll wedge your bit in and throw that piece out, or it's going to damage something. It's going to destroy something, right? So, a couple of ways to do that. My method is I like to use double sticky tape across the bottom because we've got some sticky tape in there that holds really good. I'll put sticky tape down, put it on the bed, and place it there, and I don't have to use clamps at that point. Now what happens, and what's cool about that is that whenever this gets done cutting, this piece stays the same. It stays in place. That's what I like about it. Some people prefer to use the hold downs. If that's the case and you want to use a hold down, you can tell the software, hey, I don't have anything to hold the middle down, so I need you to hold it in place somehow. And they call those tabs. We can insert tabs, and I'll show you that. Back to my design. So here's our cut path. There is.
You gotta go back to your tool path,
Tool path right here.
and it's down there, right there.
It says ignore tab.
So those are the tabs and the size of the tabs. So when I go to create tabs, it's going to ask me, how thick do you want the tabs? How high do you want them? How thin? How wide? Because you got to end up physically cutting it out with a tool after you're done. So you want to know how much you're going to be cutting. That's the setting here. But in order to place the tabs where I want them, then I would do that, I think, in the design.
Isn't it the one right next to the bullseye looking thing there? Right above it?
Right here.
Right there.
Yeah. Does that say?
No.
Kaleo.
Maybe down where it says edit?
It's the one on the right, edit on the right.
This-
Oh, yeah. So like you guys are here. Okay, so I'm editing tabs. So basically what I can do is I can go over here and notice whenever I kind of highlight over it, it thickens up a little bit. And I can place tabs. So I can say I want a tab here. I want a tab maybe here. Maybe the top and bottom. Now where it gets tricky is if you're doing text or you're doing curves, you really have to think through, okay, I've got a really small piece, like if I'm doing some cursive, like I did a thing for somebody at church where they had a kid and we did this cool sign and it was really pretty like font. We'd have lots of little thin pieces on it. So I went and did tabs on all those thin pieces because I didn't want those things to break off while I was in the middle of cutting. So I'm adding tabs here so that it's giving me support. If I hit OK, let's go back over to toolpaths and let's look at it now with the tabs. Yeah, see that? So now that's created these cool tabs to hold. It's going to hold it in while it's cutting. Does that make sense? And what you do is the downside of this is that once you get your material off, then I usually take the jigsaw or I take another saw, hand saw, and I'll cut those tabs off and then sand it down. But it is.
Flush cut saw or something like
Yeah.
that. How thick are those tabs?
However you think you want to make them. So in this tool path down here, you can create the size of the tabs.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Is there any recommendation for a certain percentage of the thickness of wood or anything?
Not that I've read. I think what I found though is that pretty much I haven't really had an issue with anything breaking off. Now I haven't done a lot of thin pieces of wood with it. I've done a lot of this hardwood stuff. I always just do the default wood. But I would experiment to see how thin you can go before it busts a piece out, before it starts to splinter something. Because it's just less material to cut.
But if you're doing this with something big, if you're using a 1/2 inch bit, and
Yeah.
you make those tabs too small, and it breaks up the piece and shoots it out, sometimes you're making missiles. So you need to be thoughtful about the size of the bit you're using to make sure you're not going to hurt yourself. If you're using a small bit, sometimes that chunk of wood will
Because at
come
some
unbound,
point,
and then
your
it'll break
bit's
the
gonna
bit.
still be in between pieces of wood. Like if that piece of wood's floating and your bit's in between there, it's always dangerous. Because it's spinning at high speed, and if that piece of wood slightly moves, it's gonna wedge that bit.
I understand that, but, okay, you said maybe you were gonna put like a name or something on it.
Yeah, sure.
Couldn't you take the whole piece, cut the name first on the path, and then make another tool path to cut around the edge?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You can create two tool paths.
Yeah.
But at some point, the tabs, are you relating that to the tab, what we're talking
Yeah,
about now?
instead of using the tabs, could you just cut what you were gonna cut first and then cut around it to cut through?
No, not really, because it's, at some point, that piece of wood's gonna be loose when it goes to cut. When it goes to cut all the way through, that piece of wood's gonna be loose and can move around.
You'd still have to use tabs.
You still have to use tabs.
Okay, all right.
And you don't want to hollow that out.
Yeah.
If you just cut the outline, it's going to take a minute, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Hollow it out, it may take an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I'll do is, I don't know that we'll cut through anything tonight, because it's gonna take a while to cut through this thick piece. But what we'll do is we'll engrave. Let me go to these tabs. Design. Let's pick another shape here. So like sticker or something like that, so it's kind of recognizable.
That star things,
Where's that at?
third one.
Oh, here? Yeah, I was wanting something that we can actually kind of, we can engrave that, I guess.
Scroll down.
I'm gonna go back to scale, it's highlighted now, let's scale it down to 4. Which is fine. And I'm gonna try to center it, but the easy way to do it is just to come over here and hit center it, right? Center it on the piece. Align with the stop. Center it there.
What the hell is that?
What to do?
You got to undo it.
It was not grouped together.
It wasn't very, yeah.
Undo.
Controls
Up one, right there.
Alright, so let's say we'll, let's just pocket that out, that might be pretty easy. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna highlight it, and I'm gonna go to toolpath. This one is, we changed it.
It didn't pick all of them.
Looks like the first E on switch. There you go.
Got to group it.
I like all of them.
Go back to design, Scott. Now highlight it all and hit the group button.
Let's see. What does that say?
Wells, that's subtraction,
How to do that?
No.
highlight all of it.
I did.
Start at the right, bottom right and go up. That was like everything. There you go.
There.
Yeah, now the,
And I do this one.
thought the group was in the middle there. No, like,
Back on the other.
Is that all of it?
I think you got it.
yep.
We do this and then we go to toolpath and I'm gonna say, let's pocket it out and see what it looks like. What I love about the software is that you can preview it. There you go. So is it set to, what is that?
Point
set
one
to
right
one?
now.
Okay. So let's hit okay. Let's show simulation.
Perfect.
Cool. All right, so we say, hey, this is what we want it to look like. We got our piece of wood here. All of our coordinates are set in. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit save. File save. Save as. We've got everything set up on the Google Drive here. Oh, I thought we had this machine set up on Google Drive. This is one, as soon as logged in, set that up, It's only because I'm on this touch TV. All these other computers are set up on the Google Drive, so you can work in here and then load it to that machine. Let's say this is
Home.
Save. Okay. So right now we've got it set up as we're just calling it test. Now it's created a G code file that now we can load to the machine. So we will talk about the machines.
Did the lightning bolt?
What, is it at the green button, load new file?
No, he's trying to send it to that
I'm
machine.
trying to send it to that machine.
I see.
So that we don't have the Gmail set up.